Hello, I'm Dylan Anderson, and welcome to another episode of F1OWC Podcast Live. I'm once again joined by three-time world champion Brandon Tanti, and today our special guest, Mr. Shannon Mortlock. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome, everyone.
So today we are fresh out of Bahrain. Obviously, new format in season 12, which we've explained and detailed over the previous podcast. Firstly, Brandon, what's your take on how the new format ran for you and for the league as a whole?
I think it was pretty good. I think we had a mixture of some interesting results. I think for me personally, it was a bit hard to get used to having two 25% races, as compared to, having one and then we had a feature race, But, have to adjust my driving style a little bit, to cater for it. I think it makes, qualifying a bit more important as well as, the new regulations we have points for pole now. So
yeah, that's right. Which I think a couple of the guys on the grid were a little bit blindsided by those changes that were made in the off season to allocate 2 points for the pole position, which, like you said, makes it more important. In the talks of the regulation change there with the format, obviously we detailed previously that the feature race in the past, being a longer race, suited your driving style in terms of coming through the pack to finish on the podium or win the race. Now to Shannon, who's been a bit of a specialist in the 25% sprint races last season, winning 5 Grand Prix. You'd think in season 12 that the sprint race format would lean a little bit more in your favour. A few mixed results in Australia and Bahrain for yourself. How will you be approaching the rest of this season knowing that you only have 25% races?
Yeah, I've been looking forward to the 25% races, because as you said, I do a lot better in them.
Mm-hmm.
Going into the rest of the season, I think I just need to fine-tune the way or how aggressive I am through the race. In the reverse grid, obviously, trying to get through the pack. You have to be aggressive enough to get through the pack in time, but not so aggressive to cause incidents or get involved in them.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. There was some comments made in the paddock chat by Mr. Ryan Lowe, just detailing that some of the guys that are starting at the front in the reverse grid race should be a little bit more mindful of the cars, the faster guys coming through the back, because they're battling for the championship and etc. etc. Brandon, do you think those comments are a little bit too early to be making that kind of statement 4 rounds into a 42 race, 4 races into a 42 race season?
I think definitely in a way it can, it is a bit early, I think, to make this sort of comments. I think, there's a lot of people on the grid that can contest for the championship, so it's hard to say who is in it and who's not at this stage. So anyone can really contest for it, and you can't count anyone out, regardless of, where they are in terms of pace, or, even at each individual race weekend, people have stronger tracks than others. So you really have to think about, your competition could change, and that's something you need to think about as well.
Yeah, no, that's it's exactly right. I think that goes back to obviously the formation change with yourself not having that that 50% race to be able to slowly pick your way through the pack. Well, I've sort of felt, and the vibes within the paddock, especially in the reverse grid race, is that a lot of those faster guys are in the back are trying to go for the big moves, to go for the big sends and the overtakes and stuff, and there is contact being made, and we sort of predicted this going into this new format. I think it'll take time for everyone to just settle down and adjust comfortably to this new format. And I think the key of the new reverse grid race is not going from the back to the podium. It's going from the back and as high up as you can safely. Because ultimately, as we saw in Bahrain, we had 9 incidents brought forward, and there was a bucket load of penalties handed out, which unfortunately changed the final classifications for a lot of people. We're just going to segue back to the Australian Grand Prix. Obviously, we had our weather draft, which was a big talking point of season 12 for pros and negatives, pros and cons on both sides of the fence in regarding to that. Wet weather again, the first time I think since season 3 or 4. Ryan Lowe has been put into a position of administration pending for season 12, as we do look to expand our team.
Yep.
There was an issue with the weather setup.
Yep.
How do you feel about the way that was handled from an administration point? And how do you think that we could go rectifying that moving forward?
In terms of the first race, I think it was, it was obviously, I don't think it was handled the best. There was, obviously there was an incident where, we had, we knew the weather going into the race, and then the lobby was set up and we headed in and we checked it, and, the race was meant to have rain within it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, it came out dry. And it led some people on the grid to suggest that, maybe, some of it was done, on purpose or intentionally, but, there's no way of saying whether or not that is, and I'm not going to say, whether or not it was done on purpose. Either way, we have faith that, it was either an honest mistake or it was something that happened within the game that maybe caused a change in the weather, even though the settings were defined beforehand. But I think we rectified it for the Bahrain race.
The Bahrain race went quite faultlessly. Obviously, McLaren's Ryan Lowe getting the pole position, breaking the lap record at Albert Park, which is fantastic, obviously taking it away from yourself in season 10, lining up on the front row, championship contender and the winner from last season. I think that was a fantastic way to kick off the season. Half a second though, a lot of question marks over that time in regards to the issue with the weather and the setup application for that. But ultimately went on to win the race, Ryan Lowe from McLaren, which is fantastic to get his career, or his season I should say, off to a good start. And then Harry Ryan, P2 for Aston Martin Red Bull Racing on his debut for his new team, and was accompanied by Austin Smedley in Rocket Williams Racing. So both those guys getting podiums on debut for their new teams. What do you take, Brandon, on Harry and Austin's performances over Australia at their new team?
I think it was a great start to the season. I think they both should be happy with, how it went. I think whatever plans they put in place or the practice that they did put in place, I think paid off. I think they knew, what was going to happen, in terms of their pre-plans, and I think they followed it through to the end, especially for Williams, finishing up there, banking some solid points for the team, and like they've said, both Austin and Mitchell, they've, expressed intentions to make sure that they, compete hard for the constructors. So, and in terms of Harry, I think he's done phenomenally over Australia. He picked up a podium and also a P4. So a P4 as well. So and
he also picked up driver of the round for the Australian Grand Prix event, which was I think, a pretty good kick off your campaign.
Credit to him. I hope he keeps the momentum going. Bahrain, I think, wasn't as good as Australia for him, but I think the points he's banked so far are looking positive for him.
Yeah, that's right. And Shannon, just some just some feedback on your time in Australia. P6 in the sprint race and a P8 in the feature. Another difficult weekend in the cockpit for yourself. Just give us an idea of what was going through your head over the Australian Grand Prix.
Yeah, obviously it wasn't ideal. Came into it pretty confident, was feeling good, was on the pace. In the first sprint race, I was running second while it was still wet, on intermediate tyres, I believe.
Yep.
And then it started raining harder, so being behind Ryan, I wanted to get the jump on him, get into the lead, so I pitted for wets.
Yep.
And yeah, it wasn't the right call because everyone ended up staying out on the inters, but live and learn. So I wasn't very happy with that, but yeah, we haven't had much experience in the wet on this game, so
Yeah, it was
that
very
contributed to that.
very interesting to see that in both sprint races, the top 5 drivers stayed out on intermediates and did the whole sprint race on intermediates despite the track going dry. Brandon, do you think that this is an issue moving forward with future variable condition races?
It is in terms of like if it's going from wet to dry, I think in particular, because in terms of a 25% race, there's just not enough time for the track to dry out, essentially, which leads drivers to, to keep staying on the tyres, because essentially you get to a point where, it's dry with only 2 laps to go, and, you're looking at your strategy and thinking, do you want to lose all that time in a pit stop just to be quicker over 2 laps?
Yeah, that's right.
The time you lose is not worth, it's really not worth it. So
Yeah. Well, looking at the feature race, obviously good result for Renault, finishing first and second for the first time in their history within the F1OWC as a constructor. Tell us a little bit about your race from a race-winning perspective.
sorry, what was that?
It was a good race for Renault in Australia feature race.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was a good race. I think looking back on it, I think the strategy went pretty well for both of us. Including Kurt as well. We both put in a bit of practice and got to learn, what would work in terms of strategy. He obviously did the opposite strategy to me, so he was on mediums towards the end, but either way we both ended up at the same part of the track towards the end. Keeping it clean, I think, was also a good benefit. It was just unfortunate for Kurt. He had a bit of a moment in the last lap which kind of cost him the lead in a way. He just he put a wheel on the grass, essentially in the last few corners, and it caused him to have a bit of oversteer. He was in the lead up until that point. But still, a 1-2 is great for us for constructors, and we're happy with that.
Do you think the frustrations of letting a race win slip through the fingers in that fashion, do you think that's going to stick with Kurt going into races later on in the season?
With Kurt in particular, I don't think so. I think initially, for anyone it's frustrating when you lose a race in that sort of fashion. But he's quick to get over things and move forward. He was quick to get over it and move forward to Bahrain, so sort of put it behind him and focus on that race. I don't think he let it hang over him that he essentially may have lost a first place. But yeah, I think he'll be okay moving forward.
Yeah, beautiful. And Shannon, P3 in the Bahrain feature race. Obviously, your first podium for Red Bull Toro Rosso Honda. Give us a little recap on your events in Bahrain leading up to that podium finish.
Yeah, so it was good to finally get a podium for them. Yeah, it was a good race. It was It was a dry start to a wet finish, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was a bit chaotic on the first lap, but managed to keep my nose fairly clean. And then just sort of tried to slowly stay where I was, because I was already pretty far up the field after a bad sprint race.
Yeah, that's right.
But then I actually made a much better decision strategy-wise, so I pitted a lot later than quite a few people, stayed on the slicks for longer, which I think helped a lot, because they were still quicker than the intermediate tyre, so yeah, I was sort of in that front group once we were on the intermediate tyres. Got past Fletcher into second.
Yep.
Mitchell was already very far gone ahead. Mitchell Collins. Then Brandon came up behind me. I'm like, oh, I'll let him go because I reckon he's quicker. Hoping he'd drag me up to Mitchell, but Mitchell was just too quick. So happy with third, but yeah.
A little bit of a cloud of concern with penalties being thrown around after the race. What's your
Yeah.
take on the penalty given to you with the contact with Fletcher, and were you worried about potentially losing that podium?
Yes, I was very worried about losing it. I absolutely agree with the penalty. It was a very aggressive toss. From my view, it looked okay, and I know you're going to say that's the cockpit view, but
No comment.
no, I was fairly aggressive. Like as soon as I came out of the pits, I went down the inside of Fletcher into turn 4, and he crisscrossed me. Went down the inside at turn 7, I believe it was, and he stayed around me outside. Then I went down the inside at turn 9, and that's when we came together a bit there.
No,
it was a very tight corner, but yeah,
yeah, that's
I
right.
was very keen on getting through on Fletcher because I wanted to catch Mitchell, but I didn't end up having the pace to do that. So, in hindsight, shouldn't have been as aggressive, but yeah.
Yeah, well, that's right, and I think it was all a bit of a learning curve for everyone. I think racing at Bahrain, a track that's traditionally not raced in the wet, we've all got minimal or no experience racing there on either of the wet tyre compounds. So I think there was going to be some room for incidences, etc., etc. But I reckon from a spectator's perspective, the sprint race was fantastic. I don't know if you guys would agree with me that every single one of us got through turn 1 in that spray on intermediates in our first wet race at Bahrain, and I think that is a testament to everyone's ability to race well. What's your thoughts on that, Brandon?
No, I think it's great, that everyone kept it clean through turn 1. It's good. I think everyone feels good, knowing that you can get through the first lap and without any sort of incidents or damage. So, and the fact that everyone made it through was, it was really good to see. And like you said, on the fact that, no one would have had much experience, driving in the wet on that particular track. It was, everyone did enough to make sure that everyone had enough room, which was, it was great to see.
It was night and day compared to the feature race start, however. Obviously, everyone back on the dry compound tyres are all going for the big moves, and caution is thrown to the side. I think overall it's pretty good. Mitchell Collin coming home in the feature race to win for Rocket Williams Racing. Massive milestone there with Williams and for Mitchell Collin winning his first race since the Season 4 Russian Grand Prix, which was 169 races ago, and I think that in itself is a massive statistic that will probably never be emulated by either myself or Brandon or whoever comes in. It will take a massive turn of fortunes for that record to ever be broken. Obviously, Mitchell Collin becoming a 4-time Grand Prix winner at Bahrain for Williams, with Williams going on to claim 5 wins in Bahrain. What do you think is special for Mitchell Collin and Bahrain and the ability to do well?
I think I think we all have those sort of tracks we just gel well with, and I think maybe in terms of Mitchell, Bahrain is just one of those tracks he manages to do well on. And also, you could, attribute, some practice that he may have put in beforehand, that helped him get up there, and get a good result. Um, yeah.
Do you think this will encourage him to obviously pursue more strong finishes like this and potentially challenge for a constructors title if Austin and Mitchell can bank some solid points?
Of course, a win is always a great motivator, I think, for anyone to keep pursuing it. Once you win, you always want to make sure that you can keep winning or put yourself in a position to try and win again. Even though the competition is strong, getting a win is always that extra bit of energy that you need to keep going.
Yeah, that's right.
And yeah,
I think it was highlighted in with myself in season 9. Getting that pole and win in Japan spurred me on to put the same amount of effort and attack into America, which followed. But I think also too, it's going to reassure Mitchell that he does have the ability to race with these guys at the front, win races, get podiums, and I think this result is really going to spur him on for the rest of the season.
Of course. Yeah.
We're going to look at the championship points after the Bahrain feature race. Obviously, Ryan Lowe, McLaren, leading the championship on 73 points, ahead of yourself, Brandon, for Renault, on 72 points, with the gap being one single point, which was obviously the result of, or the difference result from season 11 championship, with you guys being separated by 1 point. And the gap was also 1 point after the Australian Grand Prix. Do you think this trend is a little bit sort of, how's it going? Or do you think that one of you guys are going to be able to break away in the Grand Prix coming up?
It's hard to say. I mean, really, I'm not too worried about it being 1 point. I think it's still very early in the season to say, what could happen. But it's, all it takes is someone to have a bad race for someone to break away. But at the same time, this format, especially in the reverse grid, having only a 25% race, there's a lot more variables that come into play, especially if people can't make it through the pack so quickly. And I think that could be the key difference between, some big points, or the differences in points.
Mm-hmm. Was 24 points back to Mitchell Collin, who moves up into P3 in the championship of 49 points, who's 4 points ahead of Oscar Grant after his podium finish in the Bahrain sprint race. Harry Ryan, 43 points. There's a nice little cluster of guys there. Kurt Dunn, 35 points for Renault. Obviously would have been looking for a better Bahrain Grand Prix. Do you think Kurt Dunn's going to be able to bounce back and score some good points in China, Brandon?
I think he can. Definitely, especially if you look at some of his race performances at the back end of last season, even, what happened in the feature race in Australia, it shows that he does have the competitive ability to be up there with the other top guys. I think it's just a matter of consistency for him, and I think that'll, once he irons that out a little bit, I think he can definitely improve on the performance definitely of this round.
Yeah, that's right. And Shannon, in Australia, you're outscored by myself for the first time in a season. Obviously, we were teammates briefly last season. How did it feel from your perspective being outscored by me in the opening round of the season?
No, I'm not surprised, honestly. As soon as you've been back on the wheel this time, you've been really, really quick. Yeah, I'm not surprised at all. You're a lot more experienced than me. You handle pressure a bit better than me, I'd say, too.
Debatable, but yes.
Melbourne curse continues for me anyway. So.
Well, I think we can both take half of that Melbourne curse, because Melbourne's been absolutely horrendous for me in the past. Obviously, P5 for myself, P8 for you in the feature. I really think that you and I can both do really well in building Toro Rosso over the course of season 12. I know we've already had discussions about season 13 and potential moves to AlphaTauri and stuff
Yeah.
like that when the new game comes out. So I think that's going to be really exciting, setting the foundation and building our partnership as Kurt and Brandon are doing, and
Yeah.
hopefully Ryan and Oscar. I think, and I've said in previous podcasts and to Brandon outside of live chat that you have the ability to win championships and win races, but like you said, getting that experience of when to fight and when not to fight and just bank good points, I think that's hopefully something that we can build on over the course of this year. As you said, now that I'm back on a wheel and our setups are more relative, and I think that'll be really good. What's your expectations, and what are you expecting to get out of your season 12 campaign at Toro Rosso?
Well, yeah. I'm hoping to do better than last season, as per usual. Consistency is my main goal. Which is obviously difficult with these reverse grid races, but Brandon manages to do it, so it's not impossible, but something to strive for. Yeah, just hoping to get a bit more consistent. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. You joined the league back in season 9 for Haas at the Monaco Grand Prix, so we're 6 rounds into that season. The youngest driver of the F1OWC that we've ever had have gone on to claim 11 Grand Prix wins out of 74 race starts with 28 podium finishes. What are your sort of reflections on your time in the F1OWC in your short career?
Well, yeah, I reckon I've grown a lot as a driver.
And as a person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way I go about my racing has changed. Yeah, I'm much better at picking when to do what, and the way I drive the car. Drove it much more like a go-kart back then.
Yeah.
No, it was, yeah.
Ultimately, rocking up to get P4 for Haas, which equalled their best performance, which was a record that I'd held at my time at Haas in Season 7. Obviously, you've raced through that era of Brian Cruz and Brandon Tanti at the top, myself at the top, Nathan Mazzolo coming in, and then obviously we've transitioned into the Ryan Lowe and the Brandon era. Obviously, Oscar's raised his performance, Austin's there, Mitchell Collins there. How do you take on this evolution of driver performance, and do you think that despite the level of competitiveness on the grid currently, that you still believe within yourself that you can get a championship win at some point in your career?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely believe in myself that I can do it. Yeah, it's so crazy, and it's awesome to see how competitive it is at the moment. Like, what was it, a second in the top 10 at Bahrain for qualifying?
Yeah, that's right. Qualified 10th.
It's
one
so cool to see. But no, I feel like I just need to refine my driving that little bit more, and my consistency, and that'll lead me to a championship, I'm hoping.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Brandon, Chinese Grand Prix. It's a little bit of a happy place for yourself. Four-time Grand Prix winner of the Shanghai International Circuit. What's your take on the Grand Prix of China?
China is an interesting one because despite having, the success that I have had, it's not particularly a track that I do admire as much as some of the other tracks on the calendar. So it's quite funny that, a track that I'm particularly good at is not one that I like so much. But I just seem to do well there. So, it's just something about the track within itself and the way that I drive that, it works.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, two-time winner for Williams Martini. Oh, sorry, one-time winner for Williams, one-time winner for Mercedes-AMG Petronas, two-time winner for Ferrari. You return to the Shanghai International Circuit for the first time in a Renault, which currently hold the lap record by Shannon Mortlock in Season 10 with a 1:30.9. Do you think you're going to be able to clinch pole for Renault or potentially go on to get their maiden win at the circuit?
Oh, it's definitely my aim. I think every weekend I go into, I do want to contest for pole. I got close to it in Bahrain. Close, but not close enough.
With 2/10 off in Bahrain there, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I'll definitely be trying my best to pull a good result at China, particularly looking at like the history you just described. I'm looking to do to get something good out of it, and make sure that I can get the points that I can get at the tracks that I'm better at and that I know that I'm good at. So
yeah, that's right. I think obviously too a key note to make is that Mitchell Collin won the Chinese Grand Prix back in Season 3 for Williams Martini Racing. Do you think Mitchell Collin's going to be a threat after his win in Bahrain?
Oh, definitely. I think a lot of people have their eyes on him going into China on the back of a win that he's just had. You can't rule him out. Yeah, that's for sure. I think he's made it public that he's been working on some of the settings and the way he drives, which has obviously benefited him, particularly in the first couple of rounds with the results that he's got compared to say last season. So I think I'll be keeping my eye on him for sure.
And Shannon, pole sitter in Season 10, obviously current lap record holder for Renault. What's your take on the Shanghai International Circuit and your ability to go racing? Obviously, you were leading the race there in Season 10 before there was a mistake made on your behalf. Do you think that you can get a good result in China?
Yeah, as Brandon said, it's not particularly a favourite track of mine. But yeah, I always think of it as a track that I go better compared to other people there. As that was where I got my first pole position, I believe. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, well, hopefully it should be good for Toro Rosso because they did win the Season 11 feature race with Luke Smith there at the wheel before he'd obviously been promoted up to the Red Bull team. We will be, however, segueing into the weather draft for the Chinese Grand Prix, which I know has been a big talking point, which I detailed at the start of the podcast. But we were talking about potentially taking out some of the wet weather tokens to aid more dry racing, but I think that's kind of defeats the purpose of the weather draft. Ultimately, for the guys that don't know and who didn't tune in, we've got 2 of each weather allocation, and we basically draw them out at random, and that will be the weather allocation for that round. So we will be going to pull the draft for the Chinese Grand Prix practice session.
Yep.
And the first allocation will be, for practice, light rain.
Rain again,
I like it.
Alright, if the race is wet, I'm going to be upset. And the practice will segue into the heavy rain.
Yes.
Necessary. It's going to be great. We're going to have an absolute blast here. Alright. Chinese Grand Prix qualifying will be light rain.
Oh. Okay, I have to say it's not particularly something I'm looking forward to, but
And qualifying will finish in heavy rain.
Oh. The fact that the rain gets harder makes it very essential to get out there and do a good lap quickly, which is going to put a lot of pressure on some people.
Well, that's right, and I think traffic's going to be a big problem coming out of the pits and getting your clean track to run your lap. What's your takes on a wet qualifying, Brandon?
Um, it's interesting in terms of how you approach it, because you could essentially go out on a bit more fuel, and then do consecutive laps, and hopefully you can set a good time, or you can go out on low fuel, and hopefully, you can make the lap count, but then you run the risk of not potentially being able to set a quicker lap after that, especially if there's heavy rain towards the end. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting session.
I think what's important to take out of that draft so far is that practice is also going to be light rain and heavy. So practice is going to be relevant to the qualifying session. So we won't risk having people, sit out and not, participate in the practice session. So I think that's really cool to take away. We're going to do the draft for the first sprint race, and it's going to start like cloud.
Okay.
The dry race to the start of the sprint race there. And the next one will be clear. So it's going to be a dry sprint race.
There you go. That'll be very interesting, going from wet practice and wet qualifying into a dry race.
Our second completely dry race of the season.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's going to be interesting because people want to get the pole to start as high as they can, but are they going to be on a wet setup? Are they going to be on a dry setup? Naturally, you'd want to be qualifying on a dry setup, given the fact that the race is in the dry. But you may get some wildcard people going for a wet setup.
Well, that's the other thing. It also makes it interesting in terms of what tyre strategy people choose at the start of the race, because you could have people on mixed tyres. So you could have people starting on a harder compound, or some starting on the soft, so it could be an interesting start of the race as well.
Yeah, well, that's right. Imagine someone on pole position starts on the more durable compound. It should be really, really good for them. All right, so we're going to do the feature race draft now, and it will start like cloud, and it will finish overcast.
Wow. Okay.
2 dry races.
So wet practice, wet quali, and 2 dry races.
So
okay.
I can read that out for everyone.
Yeah, just read it back for us. That'd be great.
So, for practice, it will start in light rain and end in heavy rain. For the qualifying session, it will also start in light rain and end in heavy rain. For the sprint race, it will start in light cloud and end in clear conditions. And for the feature race, we'll start in light cloud and end in overcast conditions.
Well, I think it's going to be good to see how we all stack up in the new format, having 2 dry races. Obviously now, the reverse grid race is going to be completely dry. There may not be as a high urgency to just pump through the pack and before the change of conditions. Do you think we'll see less penalty infringements in the Chinese Grand Prix, Brandon?
From an admin perspective, you'd like to hope so. But,
turn 1 is very tricky.
Yeah, turn 1 is very tricky, and particularly it's a unique corner because it kind of comes back in on itself. So, it's such a long corner that people will be, sort of jockeying for position. So you're going to have, especially if people are starting on mixed tyres, it can be interesting in terms of traction coming off the line and then going into the corner itself. We've had a fair few fast starters over the past couple of races, and it's showed that some particular drivers on the grid can start well, while others can't. So,
well, I think Mitchell Collins been working on his race starts and his getaways too.
Yeah, he's done well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good little story of turn 1 for me in China back in, I think it was like season 3. You used to be able to take turn 1 flat, right? But you used to, it wouldn't turn off it wouldn't close the DRS. So you'd go down the straight, you'd have the DRS open. If you broke, it'd shut, but then you'd lose the momentum. So you'd have to keep accelerating, but then you'd get 3/4 of the right way around the corner flat, and then you'd have to manually close the DRS. Otherwise, you'd just be off in the fence. It was
Oh wow.
absolute ludicrous. But that was the difference between having a good sector through sector one and not essentially. Predictions: Chinese Grand Prix. What's your take on the predictions for the Chinese Grand Prix, Brandon?
Considering it'll be a dry race, yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. I'd say I'm going to look at Austin for picking up a podium. I think he has the potential to. It's hard to pick a race winner. There's just so many people on the grid, but I will
that's right.
take Austin for a podium.
Austin for a podium. Williams back on the podium. It should be pretty good. Shannon, do you have any picks for the Chinese Grand Prix podiums?
I think it's hard to go by Williams. They've been very impressive so far. But I think Oscar for the win.
Oscar for the win, big call.
Yeah.
I think he'll do really good. He's had a pretty good season so far for McLaren. Obviously, 2 good races and 2 sort of half good races. Obviously, caught up in that incident in the Australian Grand Prix race where he actually got stuck behind that barrier. I'm going onto the back straight there, something that we've never seen in the F1OWC. So that record and that stat will always be linked to Oscar Grant and McLaren. So congratulations to them. My podium pick for I think I can't overlook Ryan Lowe for the pole position. I think he'll be really good, even though in the past, yourself, Brandon, have been very, very strong at China. I think it'll be very hotly contested, as it has been all the way through season 11. I think Ryan Lowe will clinch another pole position and another 2 points for McLaren. As for the race itself, I reckon the winner will be Mr. Brantanti and Renault, getting Renault's first race win. I think that'll be great. I'm going to match you guys both. Williams, I reckon, will be on the podium at either of them. I won't choose. Coming through on the reverse grid race, though, I really feel that potentially Harry Ryan could get some good results and get on the podium, potentially win the race for Red Bull.
Agreed.
Yeah, depending on where he finishes in the sprint race, it'd be interesting to see. Where he starts, but I could definitely get on the back of that.
Well, I think it's also too. It's a little bit tricky because we've obviously got some new drivers on the grid that didn't do the majority of last season, so we've got no data to reflect on who's where or who's what, and I think that makes Harry Ryan the massive wild card for the entirety of season 12 up until Australia. America, as we could see what he did in America and in Abu Dhabi, getting that podium. So I reckon Harry could be a phenomenal wild card this season. What are your thoughts on that, Brandon?
Oh, definitely. Like you said, the fact that the drivers will not know his relative performance on those tracks as compared to referring the data to the other drivers they may have and the results they've picked up in the past. And he showed that he can pick up podiums and get high results. So yeah, he's kept it pretty consistent so far. So I can't see why he can't put himself in those high positions and bank good points.
Yeah, I think something to add there with Aston Martin Red Bull Racing, obviously the success that Harry Ryan is now bringing to the team after the departure of Luke and Shane. Trent Fuller has made a behind the scenes sort of announcement that he may be taking some time away from the F1OWC. How do you think Harry Ryan's going to cope with one driver and no teammate for season 12? And what does Trent's absence do for the F1OWC series, given that he was the original founder of this series?
It's a big loss to not see Trent on the grid. From a historical perspective, and for the fact that his participation in this league up to this point has been, phenomenal. The fact that, he can come, regardless of where he is in pace, he still attends and he still, want to still pick up results.
Yeah, well, that's right. 174 Grand Prix in his career that he has raced, 6-time podium finisher, and just shy of 1,000 career points. Do you, as you said, it's going to be a massive loss for historical reasons with Trent Fuller not being on the grid, as only Trent and myself are the only current season 1 drivers still on the grid. Do you think we'll see Trent Fuller back in the paddock at some point, potentially in season 13?
I believe so. I think he may just need some time to just to take a break from racing for a bit, and maybe obviously there's maybe some personal reasons that's going on, and that's why he just needs to take a step back for a bit and maybe reassess what's going on before he gets back into it again. But I think I definitely could see him back again.
Yeah. Scuderia Ferrari, constructor championship winners last season, obviously now with Steve and Fletcher at the helm. Points in Australia, which is fantastic for them. Fletcher, Sermon, where's my information here? Fletcher Sermon picking up P9, 2 points. And again in the Bahrain sprint race, what are your take on Scuderia Ferrari's performance over the first 2 rounds?
I think it's positive. I think he would have set the goal of trying to pick up as many points as he can. I think he's done pretty well so far. Especially compared to last season. He had a few string of DNFs, which I think affected his ability to pick up points, especially at a fair few races. As long as he can work on remaining consistent and keeping it on the track, and
I think
he's there.
Yeah, I think what's going to be hard for the guys over at Scuderia Ferrari to take is obviously their loss of points in the Bahrain feature. Obviously, Fletcher had finished 5th, lost that place to Oscar. Steve Shadlow finishing 7th and then being demoted down to 9th. Do you think these guys are going to be able to bounce back in China and the races to come and overcome the fact that they'd lost potential good points for the team?
Oh, yeah, of course. I think they'll be quick to put it behind them and focus on the next race. I think because of the fact that the races come so quickly at you, within a couple of days of each other. You kind of need to get over things pretty quick and just move forward. I see the potential for them to score some more points, and Fletcher can show that on his day he can pick up some good points for the team. And same with Steve. I think also, I think it's the same case as Fletcher. He's had a few DNFs over the period of last season. He just needs to make sure that he can, put the car in a position to score points and finish the race.
There's been some times, season 11 and years, seasons prior to that where, I've gone wheel to wheel with Steve Shadlow and he's been on equal pace, and on his day he can run with the top guys. And as you said, there's a few times there where he's either unfortunately involved in mistakes with other people, or it's driver error on his own behalf. But I think he has the potential to get good points for Scuderia Ferrari this year. And I think staying on with Fletcher Sermon as a teammate, I think despite some of the rumours that were floating around in the paddock at the end of last season, I think it's really good for the pair, for consistency and benchmarking, knowing that you know who your teammate is and what you are both expecting going into the races. I think
also, just quickly, I think also the fact that those two, Fletcher and Steve, are competitive within each other. They compete against each other. I think that helps their motivation to go quicker and score more points, and hopefully that competition doesn't bring them unstuck more times than they can score points. But
Yeah,
yeah,
well,
I think it benefits them more than it hinders them.
Yeah, that's right, and it definitely showed signs of that hindrance at the back end of season 11 at Mercedes, where they were. I really hope that they can move forward, and score really well for Ferrari. But we're just going to move on to Haas briefly, with Ben Matchett and Mitchell Hayward. Obviously, lots of question marks over Mitchell Hayward's driving standards throughout in the Bahrain race last night. Mitchell Hayward, and do you think that there is a problem there? Guys in the paddock are getting a little bit hot-headed coming through the pack and just expecting him to get out of the way.
It could be a bit of. I think it's maybe a bit of both. I think part of it's an element of practice. I think practice is a big part of your performances in each race. And it shows. You can tell who's practiced at points more than others when you come to a race. You can even tell that in qualifying over pace. But yeah, I think some of the drivers are at times a bit aggressive when they come through the pack, and I think it's a bit unfair to blame one particular driver for incidents that may have contributed not just because of him, but because of the person who's overtaking him as well. So
yeah, well, that's right. I think it's okay. Mitchell Hayward's got 18 Grand Prix to his career, but we did double the races last season. So you'd nearly halve that. So he's a very inexperienced driver, and you're going up against Grand Prix. Shannon Mortlock, 74 Grand Prix. Ryan Lowe, 64 Grand Prix. Are on over 50 Grand Prix. There's a lot of experience on the grid, and do you feel that it's unfair for them to mug their way over a up and coming driver with a little bit less experience? And do you think they should be a little bit more cautious, a little bit more complacent with how they handle themselves on and off the track towards newer drivers?
I think in a way, yes. I think maybe it's an issue with not racing with a particular set of drivers for so long. Match it, and me myself, like I quickly, what each individual's driving style is. So when I come when overtaking, or when trying to make my way through the field, or trying to defend from someone. So yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We're going to look at the championship points now as we move into the end of our podcast. The Season 12 Constructors' Championship points: McLaren, 187 points, Williams, 74 points, Toro Rosso, 55 points, Haas on 1 point. And we are lucky to have all of our constructors at least scoring a point in our opening 2 rounds. Obviously a big title chase between McLaren, Renault and potentially Williams. Do you think you guys are going to be able to bring the first Constructors' Championship to Renault?
Oh, definitely. Be striving for that. It's been a goal of mine ever since I started to always, work towards constructors within a team. My first season wasn't so fortunate. But, following that, the following seasons from that, it's been pretty consistent in, working towards banking points as a team with your teammate. So,
well, that's right. You're on the back of four consecutive Constructors' Championships. It's definitely quite the streak.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a pretty good run, but anything could happen this season, and with the competition that faces us, it's going to be really tough throughout the whole season. Kurt and myself are going to have to be on our A game every race to make sure that we can bank as much points as possible. You can't help the instances of getting involved in incidents, but we got to try and minimize that through each round. So yeah, it'll be tough, but we'll be working towards it for sure.
Yeah, fantastic. And just final words, Shannon, on the upcoming Chinese Grand Prix. Anything that you're hoping to achieve, looking to get out of the race?
Yeah. Well, obviously want to win them, but can't always get that. So I'm hoping both of us at Toro Rosso can get really strong results. Because I really think we can be one of the teams fighting for the constructors' title, because it hasn't really gone on for far enough in the season yet to see who is really fighting for it. Obviously, only having 2 rounds. Personally,
I agree.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to a few dry races because it'll be a bit more calm, hopefully. Although I love the wet, yeah, hopefully it'll calm down a bit. Yeah, good results.
Yeah, beautiful. Brandon, any final thoughts on the Chinese Grand Prix?
Just this whole format in terms of weather is going to be extremely interesting. You know, it's going to affect the way I think everyone approaches it and thinks about how others are going to approach it as well. Particularly in terms of tyre strategy and what you're going to do for the sprint race. In particular, I think that's going to be important in terms of where, first of all, where you qualify and what tyre you start on. But yeah, I'm hoping for a good result. The past has brought me them. I'm hoping that I can bring me them again.
Sorry.
You can never rule anything out. So just hoping
that's right.
for the best.
I think myself going into China, again, like what Shannon said, we're both looking for really good results for Toro Rosso. I think the Australia and Bahrain race didn't really sort of fully reflect what we're able to achieve at Toro Rosso. I think obviously the highlight there is Shannon getting that podium finish and my P5 finish in Australia, but hopefully we can come back and score some good points. But having said that, in reflecting on my own performances from season 11, obviously I had 3 DNFs and 1 P11 at this point of the championship, and I didn't get more than 10 points until Baku. So at this stage I'm already triple the amount of points I'd had at this point of the championship. So already on paper for me, it's better than last year, which is really all you can hope for, is coming back to a track and going better than what you did last year. Whether that's for the win, for the pole, for the podium, for top 10. I think ultimately that's what everyone strives for. But we're going to wrap things up tonight. Thanks to everyone for tuning in and commenting. There was quite a flood of comments in the chat. And we hope you guys all enjoyed this. We'll see you guys on Tuesday after the Chinese Grand Prix. We'll talk about Chinese Grand Prix, and we'll also do the weather draft for the upcoming 3 races. And as Oscar Grant put forward a suggestion in the paddock chat, is that we'll be doing the draft for the 3 upcoming races to give people some time to practice for that. So once again, thanks Brandon Tanti for joining tonight.
Thank you.
And Mr. Shannon Mortlock, our special guest tonight, thank you for joining, and I hope you enjoyed your experience on the podcast.
Oh, it was awesome. Thank you for having me.
Alright guys, thanks. See you on Tuesday.